world, and good evening, everybody. On the day the World Health Organization declares a global pandemic, we will look at the exact definition of that. We will talk a bit more about what's going on in Italy, particularly in Milan. But of course, today, absolutely dominated from the very start, from early on this morning, with a 0.5% cut in interest rates coming from the Bank of England, and onto the budget. Rishi Sunak, who's really barely had time to get his feet under the table as Chancellor. And of course, he's facing this big global downturn, the warning signs the financial markets have been sending us. And Ben Kentish, our Westminster correspondent. Ben, what were the standout points of this budget today?
Well, Nigel, it started really by talking about coronavirus, as we knew he would. There was a significant package, total of £30 billion, designed to help the economy, but also specifically businesses and workers to cope with the fallout of that virus that Rishi Sunak said would have a significant impact on the economy. So for businesses, that includes things like a £3,000 loan scheme for each small business, refunding companies who have fewer than 250 employees having to pay sick pay, and also a new loan guarantee system that should provide up to £2 billion loans for workers. This has been a key issue. Jeremy Corbyn has obviously touched on it both today and previously. They will be able to claim statutory sick pay if they are self-isolating, even if they don't have any symptoms, even if they don't have coronavirus. And they are also the government also making some changes to employment support allowance. That's the way they are going to ask people who don't qualify for statutory sick pay, either because they don't earn, either because they earn less than £18,000 a year, or because they're unemployed. They're making it a bit easier to get access to that. That said, we've talked about this before, it's only about £73 a week, that. So there's still questions about whether that's going to be enough.
Yes, and it was pointed out in the Commons that our statutory sick pay in this country is much lower than many other countries in Europe.
Lower. Yeah. And 2 million people don't have access to it at all.
Yeah.
So on tax, we thought there might be some tax rises. There were very few. There was a reform to what's called entrepreneur allowance in capital gains tax, which will raise a few £1 billion. But fuel duty, we thought might be the freeze on that's been in place since 2012, might be scrapped. It wasn't. And Rishi Sunak also, slightly surprisingly, announcing freezes to continue on beer, cider and wine. Now, that was the sort of the fiscally conservative element, shall we say, on tax, but there was a splurge of spending, £170 billion to be spent over the next 5 years, and that included a whole range of measures: £5.2 billion on flood defences, £1 billion fund for removing dangerous cladding, 27 billion on roads, £1.5 billion.
So the potholes are finally going to get filled in, apparently.
Millions and millions of potholes. I'm told, actually, equating to 8 times the size of the Royal Albert Hall to be filled in. So
I believe it.
A big issue there, but also huge promise of infrastructure, a huge promise of spending on infrastructure. Nigel, remember Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell went in to the general election, promised $500 billion of infrastructure spending. Rishi Sunak making them look almost cautious with a £640 billion promise of infrastructure spending on roads, prisons, railways, schools, hospitals over the next 5 years. Now, of course, big question is, how is he going to fund this? And the answer, in short, is borrowing, because borrowing was predicted to be $33.3 billion by 2024. It's going to be more than double, according to today's estimate, 60.2. So a huge increase in government borrowing. And again, that will raise questions about how that's going to be paid off, because the growth estimates for GDP growth, national growth in the next few years, very slow, very sluggish,
anemic,
not going above 2% in the next 5 years.
And how did Jeremy Corbyn respond to all of this?
Well, it's very hard for Labour, because ultimately this is a budget that any Labour Chancellor could have delivered. And as I said, Rishi Sunak almost going further than Labour said they would do. So Jeremy Corbyn asking a lot of specifics, some very valid points about how people who don't qualify for sick pay will get access to it. But ultimately, Labour's message was one of, this should have happened earlier. They will use this budget to say, look, clearly this amount of spending shows that the austerity of recent years was a political decision, something they've been arguing for years. But they're in a very, very difficult territory.
Because that's kind of history, and
absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of style, I mean, this is a smart young guy. From what I can see, across the board, a lot of people saying he delivered this budget rather well.
He's won a lot of support amongst Tory MPs today. He delivered it very effectively, people in the Commons seem to think, and also it was a very politically astute budget. I think in collaboration with Number 10, they are keen to ensure that Labour doesn't just lose the last election, doesn't just lose the next election, but loses the next few elections. And they want to do that basically by parking their tanks very firmly on the centre ground and giving voters what they want, which is a big series of investments in public services matched with some more small C Conservative measures on social issues. But let's just have a very quick listen to Rishi Sunak, because you say his style, for someone who's only been in the job 27 days, did win a lot of plaudits today.
Whether it's research for a vaccine, recruiting thousands of returning staff, or supporting our brilliant doctors and nurses, whether it's millions of pounds or billions of pounds, whatever it needs, whatever it costs, we stand behind our NHS.
He kept it serious. He kept it also quite conciliatory. There's a sense of national crisis, of course, Nigel, around coronavirus, and I think that helped shape the tone that Rishi Sunak. Turkey made a couple of good jokes, one at John McDonnell's expense. But ultimately, as I say, a very astute, a very assured performance from someone who was tipped as a rising star. He's risen pretty high already. And after today, a few people will be putting bets on him rising even further.
Absolutely. Ben, thank you very much indeed. That was Ben Kentish. Well, you tell me, you've seen this budget today. Are you reassured that the Chancellor has done enough to stave off the financial crisis that is being caused by coronavirus? Do you think Rishi Sunak did the job properly? 0345 6060 973. Particularly keen to hear if you are a small business. Do you think he's given you the kind of help you're going to need over the course of the next weeks and months? Well, let's get a financial markets view of the budget. And I'm going to go to Martin Malone, Chief Economist at BGC Partners. Martin, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I am well, and I have to say, in terms of style, the guy was pretty cool. That's got to be said. But the question is, this is a very expansionary budget. Martin, does it do enough to stave off what may be coming down the tracks at us?
Well, I think it's even bigger than what everybody expected and what people think is going to happen going forward. I think this is Boris's big play. And this is equivalent to 1983, which you'll remember, Nigel.
I do,
with
sadly, yeah.
Thatcher delivering the financial Big Bang. That clearly was for the City of London. This is Boris's policy Big Bang. And it's an unprecedented move to basically, we obviously had a dust-up between number 10 and number 11, the neighbours. But this is number 10, number 11 and the Bank of England all moving together. And that is very unprecedented. And that basically means they mean what they say. And we're going to get investment at rates of 6% of GDP per year. This is triple the normal rate of the last century. We're going to get a credit ease by the Bank of England equivalent to 13% of GDP. Every central bank and government in the world would love to have launched what they've done today in the UK.
And Martin, you were one of the economists urging this kind of action, weren't you?
We were urging that this was the only solution. Basically, the economy has been running at a real GDP rate of 1%.
Which is anemic, isn't it, really?
Well, we view it driving a car. We're going to get to Birmingham, but we're in first gear. We got to shock the system and bring it up to third or fourth gear. You can only do that with an upside budget shock, and it can only come from investment.
And is the argument, Martin, that because 10-year government bonds, gilts as we know them, are trading at virtually zero, is the argument that because you can borrow money for nothing, this is the time to borrow money?
That is a correct argument, but the reason why the interest rate is very low is because the economic function is low. We're at a low level. And to shock the system to a higher level of growth, we're very, very lucky to have a low interest rate. Very, very easily, we could have had a 5 or 10% interest rate. So we should be taking advantage of a low interest rate. And the investment that's needed, clearly it shouldn't be wasted. There's enough civil servants and there's enough people in the private sector that really want this investment. And clearly people are going to have to watch how that investment is spent.
And as a city economist, give us marks out of 10 for this budget.
9.
Wow. That is, Strictly Come Dancing really gets that high. Martin, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's interesting, wasn't it? Martin Malone, Chief Economist at BGC Partners, giving the Chancellor 9 out of 10. And a lot of what Martin said is true. You know, our growth has been weak, our productivity has been poor. We really have been just bouncing along the bottom. And if there ever was a time to increase government spending, if you can borrow money as a government for 10 years at virtually zero interest, I guess now is the time to do it. I have to say, for my part, I thought he looked very professional. I thought he looked very assured. He clearly is. He clearly is a very impressive political operator, and there's not many times LBC listeners have ever heard me say that about people on either of the front benches. No, this is an impressive bloke, and I think my view is he did as much as he could in this budget. However, I personally, do I feel reassured that he's done enough to cushion us against what I think is going to happen to our economy over the next few weeks and months? Well, the truth is, I don't think any government is big enough to cushion us against what could be quite a big economic shutdown in this country. And it's all well and good talking about people working from home and all the rest of it, but the truth of it is a lot of people have to go to work. You know, they work in factories or they work in the service industries. So I don't think this budget stops us from going into contraction, from going into recession. And I think Sunak almost said that. It doesn't stop us from doing that, but I think it will help to cushion the fall. Disappointed that the budget did not reduce the foreign aid budget or solve the 75-plus free TV licences, says Mac from Worcester. Well, look, I think the foreign aid budget is a serious bone of contention. But look, overall, I think he did pretty well. Am I reassured by it? Do you know what? It's about as good as he could have done. That's my view. Tell me whether you agree or disagree. 0345 6060 973. This is the Nigel Farage Show. It's 6:15. Time for doing his best to try and cushion businesses against the expected downturn that is to come. Do you think he's done enough? Is the question I'm posing this evening. I think he's done about the best he could, but it won't be enough if I'm right about the scale of a downturn. Now, today, it's been announced that the number of people testing positive for coronavirus in the UK has risen to 460, up from 373 this time yesterday. It's the largest daily jump so far. In fact, cases have doubled in the last 4 days. And the World Health Organization says the outbreak can now be called a global pandemic. I wonder what that word actually means. And to help us with that, we're very lucky to have Hugh Pennington, Emeritus Professor of Bacteriology at the University of Aberdeen. Hugh, good evening and welcome to LBC.
Hi, Nigel.
Explain to us, tell us, what is a pandemic?
Well, the word global you introduced is absolutely spot on. It means that a virus or a bacterium is causing disease in all the continents. Except, we rule out Antarctica. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, but it's in the Americas, it's in Asia, it's in Europe, and so on. And when that happened, and it has happened, and it happened a wee while ago for COVID-19, the official name of the coronavirus, it became a pandemic by definition. It doesn't actually mean it's any nastier, or we should give up, or we should do anything different. It's just a name for a global occurrence of infection.
It just sort of sounds a bit scary, that's all.
It does. People have written books called Pandemic or whatever it is, which have sort of horror kind of features to them. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means, unfortunately, it has spread throughout the world, which is because it's been very good at getting about. And so have people, of course. They've been flying, carrying the virus with them and so on. So not surprising that they've had to declare it a pandemic, because officially it's been one for quite a while.
And Hugh, I'm looking at the Italian figures today, and, well over 10,000 confirmed cases. The death toll in Italy up another 31% overnight. Is it likely that the United Kingdom is heading towards those sort of figures?
I wouldn't use the word likely. I think the Italians had an unfortunate start when they didn't spot that the virus was buzzing about in the north, started seeding itself, so that by the time they knew it was there, it was almost too late. Well, it was too late to stop it in Lombardy and those places, getting a real grip. I think we've been much more fortunate in, most of our cases have been imported cases. There's a little bit of dubiety about one or two of them. How they caught it, we don't know. And the really good news today for the UK was this very, very much expanded testing regime, which will tell us whether the virus is creeping under the radar, causing cases we don't know about, because the vast majority of people, 70, 80% of people, just have a mild infection that you wouldn't even bother writing in your diary, you certainly wouldn't go to the GP about.
So are we still in the containment phase, in your opinion?
Sorry?
Are we still in the containment phase, in your opinion?
Oh, yes. We're still containment, and the longer we can keep the containment phase, the better. In the sense that we can put up if it does get out and it does cause an outbreak in a particular place, because that's probably what it would do to start with. It wouldn't cause massive outbreaks throughout the whole country. It would be in one or two places. Like flu does that as well. But there are differences with flu. But if it causes an outbreak in a particular place, then the draconian measures that have been talked about, closing clubs, all that kind of stuff, would fall on that place. They wouldn't necessarily fall on the whole country, because it would depend on how many cases there were, whether they've established how it's getting about, all that kind of thing. So, but we're still in the containment phase, and let's hope that stays, because the view is that once the weather gets a bit warmer, the virus will have more trouble getting about. Yeah, that may not be right, but, at least that's the hope anyway.
And finally, Hugh, some amazing photographs today of the Cheltenham Racing Festival yesterday. 160,000 people crammed into the stands at Cheltenham yesterday. Does that make sense?
Well, as long as they were in the stands and, behaving well with their, tissues if they sneezed, and washing their hands in the stands is probably quite difficult.
Yes, yes.
It's probably more important what they do before they went, to watch the horses, and what do they do afterwards. They all rush to the bar. That's a much better place for the virus to get about, in a crowded bar where you're, basically close to lots of folk and, breathing in the droplets.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, as a Cheltenham veteran, there's a lot of people in the bars there. Hugh, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, Hugh saying that basically, Hugh Pennington saying basically that at the moment we're still in containment is his view, and whilst the numbers are up, they're not massive in this country as yet. Back to the budget, and what is your view of this budget? Does it do enough? Does it do enough to help small businesses if we get a really nasty downward shock? Small businesses need lower rates of tax and softening of labour laws to encourage and support them. The Conservatives need to change their name because there's not much Conservative about them, says Marion from London. Marion, I was looking particularly for the IR35 rules, which we have debated on this programme. Millions of people out there who act as contractors, a change in the law due on the 6th of April that would pass the onus of that from the individual providing the service to the big company taking the service, and the fear that blanket bans would happen, that many small self-employed sole traders could lose 25% of their income. We're told in the budget that they have listened to this, and that when they publish the bill, the piece of legislation, we'll get more detail. I'll be watching that one particularly closely. Paul is a new caller from Salisbury. Paul, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well, welcome. So, what do you make of the Sunak budget?
I think, like you said earlier, he's done probably all that he can.
Yes.
But I can tell you now, it's not going to be anywhere near enough from my personal experience. Can I go back in history 2 years? My small business is a retail outlet in Salisbury.
Yes.
And everybody will probably remember 2 years ago.
Because you had that horrendous, yeah.
We had the horrendous Novichok attack. I can tell you now that our city still hasn't recovered from that fully. Our footfall is still well down.
Gosh.
Now, during the Novichok attack, the government chucked a sum of money at our city, which was supposed to be administered by our local authority. Now, my business lost half its turnover directly because of Novichok and the decrease in footfall, which was £100,000 of my turnover gone. Now, that meant that my shop, profit-wise and income-wise, actually lost £40,000. That meant I had to save the people in my shop. I had to go back out to my original career and work 5 days a week. because I could no longer pull a salary out of the shop. Now, all I got from the government fund, after proving all of that to my council, was £4,000.
Yes, and you're going to get rate relief, aren't you, of course, from this budget? But your point is that rate relief of a few thousand is nothing if you're losing 40 or 50,000.
It's absolutely nothing. I'm
Yeah.
already on the small business relief. I have a small shop. My rates are only £1,000 a year anyway. Now, I'm going to get another £3,000 helicopter payment by the sounds of it. So that gives me £4,000. I can tell you, last week, the turnover in my shop went down 40%.
Yeah.
And that was over the first week of coronavirus really
Paul,
taking the nation.
That absolutely fits in with my view. The Chancellor's trying to help, but it's nothing if business falls off a cliff. It's just nothing.
I know that I can tell you now, you look around our city from Novichok, there's so many shops that shut down. There's going to be shops shutting down. If what's happened over the last week happens over the next few months, and I seriously suspect we're going to have a bit of an Italy situation, because they say it's in containment, but it's not. I went on the tube last week. I had to go to an event in London, and I'll tell you what, I won't be going on there again in a hurry. Not with the way it's spreading at the moment. It's going person to person now, that's without doubt. The tube, I think it was the City line, had gone down or something.
Lots
so there was a delay.
Lots of overnight cleaning on the tube going on, Paul.
God, yeah, but I don't think that's going to be enough. I mean, it was like being in a cattle car.
Even the health secretary has been diagnosed with coronavirus. So Nadine Dorries. Paul, thank you for your call. I get the points you're making. Robert from Boston says, good evening, Nigel. The budget is terrible. The Chancellor is spending too much money. I'm a fiscal conservative, and I cringed every time he announced another billion. The country needs to live within its means. Robert, I've been arguing that for a very, very long time. I argued it very hard as leader of UKIP in the 2015 general election. And I kept hearing this rot about how, they are cutting the debt. They weren't cutting the debt. They were cutting the annual deficit and willfully confusing people, and Labour never challenged the Conservatives on it. But, Robert, we're in a mess. We're in a real mess. And we can borrow money for nothing. Normally I'm a fiscal conservative, but I'm not right now, and I think what the government doing is the right thing. And actually, do you know what? If this crisis gets worse, they may need to be even looser fiscally than they've been today. This is the Nigel Farage Show at 6:30. Time for the news with the crisis that's coming down the tracks at us. Well, I think he's done as much as he can, but I don't think it is going to be enough for many people, is my view. To Italy, and I know I've been talking about this every single day, but just sort of give ourselves some sense of where we are with this in Italy. On Monday, 8,000 diagnosed cases, 463 deaths. On Tuesday, 8,500 diagnosed cases, 631 deaths. Today, 10,500 diagnosed cases and 827 deaths. That's up another 31%. Overnight, and still 42% of people in intensive care are under the age of 64, which is the figure I keep putting out there. Now, there may be a reason for that, and this is a fairly unpalatable truth, but I know from friends and sources in Milan that there are simply not enough lung ventilators for all the people who have got acute pneumonia, and so the doctors are having to make incredibly difficult choices, and I'm guessing that maybe a lot more young people than older people have been given a chance, and that's maybe why such a high percentage do appear there on that list. So the situation is very unpleasant and very, very serious. And into this today comes China, because the Chinese outbreak has slowed, and the Chinese are not in the state of panic that they were. So today the Chinese have announced that they will donate 100,000 high-tech face masks to Italy, 20,000 protective suits, 50,000 swab diagnostic kits, and they're about to sell 1,000 lung ventilators from China to the Italians. And all of this on the same day that Germany have said they will not fulfill their orders for face masks and other medical gear to both Austria, Switzerland and Italy, because the Germans have decided they need all this stuff inside Germany in case their own outbreak gets worse. Two things to say about this. Firstly, when it comes to death, that's a national thing. It's not a supranational thing. It's not an EU thing. And secondly, I can see the narrative in Italy already. It is in our hour of need. Our so-called partners in the European Union turned their backs on us. And believe me, if Brexit and Trump were the beginning of the breakup of the globalist project, I think what is happening here with coronavirus, in the end, will break it completely. I really, genuinely do. Watch for that narrative. In our hour of need, the Germans wouldn't help us. It's coming, believe you me. Back to the budget. Let's go to James in Lakeside in Essex. James, good evening.
Hey, Nigel, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Has he done enough for you?
Well, see, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place because we're not a big business, but we're not a small business. We're the medium-sized business that I always feel gets squeezed so hard. We're the people that sort of get all the costs that a big corporate has to swallow, but don't get the benefits of a small micro business.
How many staff, James? How many staff have you got?
I've got 450 over 7 companies. We own children's indoor play centres, visitor attractions, and day nurseries. And as you can imagine, Nigel, on a daily basis, I'm changing my pants about 3 or 4 times because I'm panicking about it.
Difficult.
My payroll's about £500,000 a month. So I need to make sure that we cash flow £500,000 a month at least in other bills. So we bring in about £1 million worth of cash flow a month. I'm not talking about profit here, just cash flow.
Sure.
And so right now, to stand here today, we haven't seen, I can't accurately tell you if we've seen a drop-off, and we were sort of the same as March last year, but I think it's coming. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm sort of, we'll get through this. 2 weeks ago, oh, shut up, it'll be fine. But now, Nigel, my thoughts and feelings are a bit more of a panic. So I was watching the budget with my FD today, and I was listening to the business rates thing. So I was listening now. I was super excited. I thought, this is great. We're not going to have to pay business rates till the end of the year. And then I listened to the detail that it's this 51,000 rateable value. I don't know if you know this, Nigel.
That's not very relevant for you, is it?
No, because there's not. I mean, they said cinemas might be. I don't know a cinema in the land that's got a rateable value of 51,000.
No, quite.
It's basically to understand that. I mean, I'm not teaching you to suck eggs here, but for your listeners, whatever your rent is usually relates to your rateable value. So if you're paying, like we're in Lakeside Shopping Centre, we pay £65,000 in rent for that shop. So we've got a rateable value of 65,000. Guess what? We get diddly squat off. And so my rates bill is £60,000 a month for all my sites. And I was generally thinking, well, this is great. If we could get the business rates off, we could save that cash flow into our business to protect and to help pay our staff. Will banks lend money? I've been speaking to my bank manager today. He works in the division of RBS.
Well, there is this rate cut that's happened overnight, and Sunak absolutely insisting that money will flow to business. But you don't quite believe it, James, do you?
Well, I spoke to my bank manager. I've got a great relationship with him, and I'm not going to say where he's from, but he did say, in reality, will that actually happen? Because I think, the headlines, and then when it goes to a credit committee, that's how banking works, will credit back up what the government are saying because it's their purse strings. I know that the government are saying that they're going to guarantee 80% of the loans, but how long is that going to take to get into banks' credit committees?
But James, let me ask you, as somebody running, and it is a pretty fair-sized business that you're running. What else could he have done today?
Well, I was looking for a reduction in VAT. Gordon Brown done that in the 2008-2009 crisis, reduced it down to 15%. What I get very fed up with business in this UK is we are taxed so much on turnover and not taxed very heavily on profit.
Yeah.
My view has always been, if we're making some profit, put some in the kitty, but stop taxing us on turnover. Business rates, insurance premium tax, VAT. I could go on and on.
All right. No, James, I think we got the message. Don't worry. I think we got it loud and clear. Listen, James, thank you very much indeed. And James saying VAT, that's what matters to him, and that hasn't happened in the budget. Breaking news, NHS England have said another patient has died in Warwickshire after testing positive for coronavirus, bringing the total to 8. We have no more details about the patient, their age, or whether there are underlying health conditions. We'll find out more. Stick with us here on LBC. Let's go to Wimbledon and speak to Michael, a new caller. Michael, good evening. What did you make of the budget?
Hey there, Nigel. Great to hear from you. Good evening to you.
Good evening. Well, Sunak, he's quite a smooth performer, isn't he?
I'm actually just calling in to pass on the information that you've won the NEAS International Award for international hosts who are complete and utter dipshits.
Oh, very good. Goodbye. Oh, we do. Never mind. Let's go to Andy in the East Riding. Andy, hello.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. It's a bit overcast and rainy up here in the East Riding, but it normally is and has been for about 3 months.
Now, we have a Chancellor, of course, who represents a constituency in the North Riding.
He does indeed.
How did he do today?
I was very impressed. I think he didn't want to do the budget the way he did it. Mm-hmm. I think events have forced his hand. And COVID aside, I think it's very indicative that we are definitely going to leave on the 31st of December, come hell or high water.
Yes, that point was made.
And probably going to leave with no deal.
Andy, do you know what? I disagree with that totally, and I'll tell you why. I actually think that now is a very good time for us to get a trade deal with the European Union. The last thing Italy wants are tariffs on their goods that are sold to the United Kingdom. We've already seen the European Banking Federation, a very pro-EU group, saying to the Commission, don't play hardball with the Brits, markets matter more than politics. And Andy, if we are going into a difficult credit time, do you know what? Those European banks will need the liquidity of the City of London. So Andy, I'm actually quite bullish about a trade deal.
Well, Italy, I think, is a busted flush now. I was reading in several broadsheets this morning that they need a $700 billion bailout sometime in the next couple of months.
Well, they may need that depending on the stability of the banking system, but that is estimated to be the worst-case scenario. And the argument, Andy, is, of course, that the German taxpayer, the Dutch taxpayer, just simply will not fund that.
Well, the problem with the EU, in my opinion, has always been that the Germans do whatever the Germans feel like doing, and they don't care about anyone else.
Do you know, when it comes to
it... And they look at the rest of the EU as something that they can use.
But in a crisis, Andy, all these countries become national again, don't they?
Oh, the Germans have gone national very quickly, following... they're not impressed with Austria and Slovakia for closing their borders with Italy. They're saying that's going against Schengen, and it's eroding the principles of freedom of movement. And there's the business with the face masks.
Well, and they won't sell face masks, and the Austrians have closed the border to the Italians unless they can prove they're coronavirus negative. And a lot of things going on. Andy, would you be worried, though? Let me ask you this question very quickly. We're going to have an economic downturn, that's clear. But if we left with no deal, would that make it even worse?
I don't think it will. I think he's just hedging he's hedging his bets for the worst case scenario.
Okay.
And I don't think it will be.
But on balance, Andy, a good job, yeah?
I think for his first outing and for a young Chancellor, he is a young Chancellor.
He is very.
I think he's done very well.
OK, Andy, thank you. Well, actually, a lot of people, like Ruth in Bucks, who says 2 thoughts on the budget. 1, thank goodness Corbyn's not in charge. 2, Sunak, upbeat and positive, with a plan. We're looking at a future Prime Minister. And a lot of people, Ruth, have been saying that today. This is the Nigel Farage Show. It's 6:46. Time for the news headline. Many people praising him, many saying a future Prime Minister, lots saying it's a good thing. He's pumping money into the economy. Now, I get this. How come hypocrites like you, Nigel, criticise Corbyn's Labour Party and their plans to borrow to invest, yet praise Boris's plan to do the same? Look, I don't know who you are. I have been critical of the way governments and oppositions have been pulling the wool over our eyes for a very, very long time. You know, the national debt in 2010 was 650 billion. It's more like 1.8 trillion now, all right? So I've been very critical of this, but here is the point. We are at a very bad moment. And if ever there was a time to borrow money and pump it into the economy, it is at a time when you can borrow money for basically nothing. At an interest rate hovering at around about zero, the government can borrow tens of billions on 10-year money, 30-year money. If there's ever a time to borrow money and spend it, it is now, faced with the kind of crisis that we've got. And that's the point about monetary policy and fiscal policy. You have to be flexible and adaptable to what the conditions are. But there's plenty of criticism for the budget too. Chris in Darlington says, I'm really disappointed but not surprised he hasn't cancelled IR35. Well, Chris, we're going to wait and see what the detail is. He did say we've listened, and we'll see what the detail is when the bill is produced. He said, when all the businesses close, it'll all be put down to coronavirus. Well, we'll see. Let's go to Robin in Whitehaven. Robin, good evening to you.
Hello, Nigel.
Good evening. Good to speak to you again. Tell me, Robin, what did you make of this budget?
I think it was a typical budget of a young man who hasn't been in the job that long. And I think it was a rubbish budget. I'm glad that you mentioned that the national debt has gone up. Now, last year, I think the economy shrank twice. If it had shrunk for a third quarter, we'd officially been in a recession, if I'm correct.
We were getting closer to it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's true.
So
yes.
I think they're trying to blame this coronavirus on any slump the economy might have. I think the Chancellor has ducked the IR35, he's ducked the social care. I think it is a budget. There's nothing to help the workers who were just above the threshold for the universal credit. So if you're just above that, £95 sick pay ain't going to help anyone. The government have mishandled this coronavirus, in my opinion. They should have shut the airports down. Had people.
Robin, I've been banging on about that for days. Absolutely.
And I really do. I think this budget is sleight of hand, smoke and mirrors. One of the previous callers said, why didn't they drop VAT? You know what I mean? And everyone's a winner with dropping VAT. Where's all this money coming from as well? Where's it all coming from? It really is a budget that needs a lot more.
Well, the money's coming from borrowing, Robin. That's quite simple. Robin, one bit of good news: the fuel escalator, hasn't come back on, and the oil price has collapsed. So we could be seeing petrol at around about £1 a litre. That's quite good news, isn't it?
Well, if you, I suppose it's a good. Everyone needs fuel because they need to get to work and everything, so that'll put a bit more money back in people's pockets. So
yes,
that's a good thing.
That's one good thing. Good. I've got you to agree to one good thing. Robin, we're headed for a tough time, aren't we?
Oh, I think we are, but I think we were heading for a tough time regardless of this coronavirus. The economy was slow, I said.
Yeah, I mean, look, even before this hit, the economy was anemic and our productivity figures terrible. Robin, thank you very much indeed for your call. Steve says, you can't borrow yourself out of trouble. Oh, we have. And Karen says, I'm loving the interest rate cut, saving me 50 quid every single month. Linda is a new caller from Bedford. Good evening, Linda.
Hi there. Hi, Nigel.
Hi. So, have you sort of got some reassurance from Rishi Sunak today?
I mean, I have to say some of what he said has been really welcome in terms of particularly protecting the most vulnerable. But I am concerned about how what he's doing for small businesses is going to impact on, young entrepreneurs. Both my children have got young businesses. My son has a contract with a global player who I won't mention, but has cancelled everything globally. He should have been going off somewhere else in the world next week. He can't go. He's had another contract with the Geneva car festival, whatever they call themselves, going down.
And that was all cancelled, wasn't it? Yeah,
that was all cancelled.
Yeah, I knew that.
He does a lot of weddings and stuff like that as well. So, I met with him today, and I just thought, I just don't know how he'll get out of this.
But Linda, with the best will in the world, there's nothing the Chancellor can do about that, is there?
No, but I do think that you do need to think about how do you protect as many people as possible. And some of the, obviously he's trying to get the biggest reach, and I understand that, to try and reach as many people as possible. But you do need to think about how do we actually do what we can. I mean, I'm pleased with what some of the banks are doing. That's fantastic. And hopefully there'll be some more work like that. But I just think, my daughter's got a business that's a beauty business, and she was saying to me today as well, I don't know if people are going to want to come to me anymore because of, obviously of the fear of spread of...
I know.
She has to meet certain...
I think there are times, Linda, when there are big moves in the world and big moves in the economy that are way bigger than the ability of government. And I think what the Chancellor was trying to do was to help alleviate potentially some of those problems. So, for example, if you're running a small business and a member of staff goes off sick, they're going to help you with that. They're going to cut business rates. But Linda, I sympathise with your children and the difficulties they're having with their business. I really genuinely do, and I thank you for your call. Adam from Nantwich says, How do you think the Tory government would have responded to today's budget if it were Labour who'd won the election? No doubt they'd be accusing Labour of reckless borrowing and unnecessary spending. Well, actually, Adam, this is why Jeremy Corbyn basically said, we agree. You just perhaps could have done it a couple of years earlier. So, yeah, you could call it a one-nation budget, you could call it whatever you want. But as I say, again and again, I am not a great believer in big borrowing and spending by governments, but now is the moment we have to do things like that. And whatever we do, this downturn is likely to be far bigger than anything that the British government can do. I don't believe the Chancellor had much to do with the budget. However, he delivered it well, says Marion in London. Marion, several critics said, the one thing Sunak can do, give him a script, he'll read it out word perfectly. But did somebody who only got their feet under the desk a few weeks ago actually write the budget? Well, of course they didn't, but he would have put his own tweaks on it. And he is a bright guy. There's no question about that. I'm back with you tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick.
We will make America great again.